and then jump back to the syllabus. And I wanted to start by going back to the where we left off last time, where two things. One is we talked about the transferable skills of teaching, and hopefully that was a good process for you to see how the list of skills that are involved with being a good teacher do transfer into almost any job. And then we also did a self-assessment, two self-assessments actually. One was to look at your own ability of your own skills on that list and start to think about ways you could improve those skills. So that was useful. And then we also looked at the results from your taking the Felder and Solomon Index online questionnaire, and was very interesting because we saw quite a bit of variation in the way, basically, if you look at it as a four-dimensional space, at where we all landed at points in that space, and quite a bit of difference. So the meta idea there was that there are quite a bit of variations in learning style, even among a group of us who are, face it, somewhat homogeneous in the sense that we're all, in grad school and at Berkeley, and in engineering for the most part. So, but even still, we have very different learning styles. So I want you to take that to heart in thinking about your own students and the way you teach and the way you think about presenting lectures or work. And what I asked you to do is to prepare to write a report on that. And what I'd like to do now is do a breakout for you to talk a little bit about what your insights from that were. In other words, where your learning style was different than others and how that may help you shape how you might teach differently or communicate differently in any kind of a setting. Okay, so we're going to do breakout rooms. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to talk about that. Before we go in, I also want to mention that there's the learning styles and strategies links that were in the book as well. I mean, in the syllabus as well for week 4. And I want you to, if you haven't had a chance to look at those, it's also relevant to chapter 15 in the book, is on learning theories. And so I want to just take a little look at that. You don't have to dive in great depth, but I just wanted you to know that there's these models out there of differences of how students learn. Okay, so again, here's this is the homework that actually be for it was for this week, was to discuss ways that you might balance your own learning style differences with to help students who have different learning styles. Okay. So is that clear on what we're going to do on the breakout room? All right, I have 37 here, so that's 18. I'm going to make 18 breakout rooms. So hopefully it's going to be 2 to a room. And if you get stuck, just come back and I'll be happy. Maybe I'll talk to you. All right. So you're all good, and we're going to make it 10 minutes. And then we'll meet back here. Okay. See you in a few minutes. See you in 10 minutes, everyone. Okay, I have Anthony here on audio. And Tatiana, she just went. Anthony, can I put you in a breakout room? Let's see, Emma.
I think my breakout room was just me.
Yeah, I'm going to move you, Emma and Preston. Good. I'm going to put you together in one breakout room, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Move to 18. Preston, where do you go? There he is. Move to, You're already, Preston, you says you're in room 18. Okay. But you guys are both here. That's interesting.
Yeah, I was by
Okay.
myself.
Who? Anthony, is that you?
Yes, I'm
Meng
here.
is, okay, I see Meng is by himself. I'm going to put him in room, Meng, I'm going to put into room 19.
Strange. I have no idea why we have another another me actually connect to the audio. Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's 2 U's. All right, let me see here. And it's funny, I put Emma and Preston into breakout room 18, but they're back here.
Oh, actually, I think I can join breakout room 18 now. Okay, I'm gonna try it.
Okay.
Yeah, I was by myself, and then now my nose is bleeding. So.
Anybody in the breakout room 19?
Let me just see. Breakout room 19, I have Anthony and Meng. Anthony, I don't know how to move you in there. It's very weird. Okay. Well, we can just hang out here. Preston, you're doing all right?
Yeah, so my nose just started bleeding actually, but I'd be happy to talk through it if I can.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
What's up?
Well, sorry about the nosebleed. Okay. So talk to me about learning styles. Did you go over your learning style? Actually, Emma, why don't you join us here? We'll talk for the time we have left. We have 7 minutes. So, Preston, maybe you could start. Share with us what you learned about your learning style and how that might change how you communicate, either in a class or otherwise.
Is this with respect to the assignment, the homework assignment?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So one thing that I just basically started with was that most people are visual learners. And then the assignment seemed very much like what is different and like how would you do things with respect to your differences. But I was like, well, that's true, but in order to address those differences, I think it'd be better to first, look at what we have in common. And if most people are visual learners, I would then use the visual learning techniques to then, as a first order mechanism, to then go tackle those differences in what I would deem second order mechanisms. So like I put that I'm an active sensing and global learner, and the general idea of my paper was that I would use visual learning to address those differences, but within like a visual mechanism. And some ways in which I could go about doing those. So I'm a global learner. I like to see the big picture. I could attend to my sequential learners, for example, by starting with a small example and then adding those layers, bells, and whistles over time in a manner that would suit those sequential learners. Or me, I would like to just I would like to see it up front and then go the opposite direction, like see the generalized equation, for example, and then down, add constraints, and then say, okay, this is where we're at now.
Right. So you like to do the outline and then say, here's where we're going, and then sort of break down and go through each piece.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. That's great. But I also think it's important to know that some people like to go the opposite, right? They like to start from the pieces and build upward. So,
yeah, that's what I said. I could start with a small example and then build on it.
Right. Okay.
Addressing those different learning, the different learners on this one
Good.
axis.
Okay. Good.
Right.
That's great. All right. Great. Emma, do you want to share with us something that you learned from that?
I think just to add on to that, I think that was really good. Like, my learning style is pretty balanced between sequential and global, but I do think when I teach sections, I tend to go the sequential presentation because it just seems natural in terms of like PowerPoint. You use pages and things just look more sequential that way. But actually, one time a student asked me like how concepts relate to each other. I feel like that's kind of maybe a global learner kind of struggle because he understands individual concepts, but he doesn't understand how they are connected. And then he actually, while I was explaining to him, he actually drew out this tree, which was super impressive. And I was like, okay, next time I can present the concepts in that type of structure, in addition to like PowerPoint pages, to help them get, okay, if you get one point in the tree, you can kind of extend out and see what the big picture is. I thought that was interesting, to accommodate global learners.
Yeah, and also visual, right? Because what was interesting there is that it was a tree, right? It was some kind of geometric way of looking at the formula. I mean, I think, you know, to my mind, a lot of way I think about that is the outline. And one thing I've been doing this year is I've been converting all my notes to Google Docs. And Google Docs has this whole outlining method that's very nice. It's helpful because on the left, then you see the outlines of the class as you're going through it. So I haven't fully figured out how to get this going, but it is really helpful, I think, to for a class to say to start out and say, here's the outline, and it sort of stays on the left side of the screen the whole time, and then they can see where it's going, where, you know, how everything fits together. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
does
but I like the
outline
idea of
have like different levels, like hierarchies?
Yeah.
1.1,
yeah.
1.1 point. Okay, that's good.
Yeah. Actually, if you want to know where it is in the if you go in Google Docs, right next to where it says the font, there's another thing that if you just pull down that menu, it will say heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and it will let you set all the heading levels for all the different parts. And so you highlight a piece of text and you say it's level 1, and it'll get highlighted. It'll make it big, and it'll put it in the outline.
Oh,
so
awesome! Yeah.
It's interesting because as far as I know, like PowerPoint doesn't do that automatically.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, you have to do it manually. But you know, when you give a talk, you think about it, you give an outline a lot of times, right? And so to think about giving the outline for each lecture is a way of doing that. Okay, good. So we only have a couple minutes left. Stefano or Mallory, do you guys want to share with us anything that you learned from that exercise and maybe help you some insight into how you teach better or communicate better for people who are different than you?
I guess I can go first. So like I got like the 11 score or whatever for like being active. Like I cannot like sit down and like I have to like I learn best just by like doing something. So like that's why I really like labs and stuff for that. And I know like everyone can learn that way. So Stefano was actually telling me about like the flipped classroom learning, which was interesting, where like and also a part of being active, like I learned by like doing homework. Like a prof can lecture me for hours, but like I learn best just like doing it myself first, I guess. And so like Stefano was like telling me about like the idea is like you kind of like start your homework before you enter your class, and then so you're kind of self-teaching yourself, and then like the teacher like will fill in the holes kind of thing. So
yeah, it's actually really interesting. I think this whole question about homework, because I encountered this where everybody's coming back in, but we could just keep talking here. So, and Stefano, I haven't forgotten about you. We're going to get you in there. So one thing about homework, Mallory, is that my daughter's taking a senior AP calculus right now, and she was trying to do some problem, and she's like, Dad, can you help me with this problem? And so I went over, and what became very clear was that that she was trying to solve a problem that she hadn't been taught how to do it yet. And so after a little while, I said, wait a second, well, are you going ahead of? She said, no, this is what she does. She gives us the assignment for the thing she's going to teach in the next class. So it's very interesting. So what she does is kind of let the students struggle with it, trying to figure out how to do it when they haven't been taught how, right? And that was a surprise to me because I thought, wow, that's kind of an interesting. I never imagined that, right? I used to always assume that you got the techniques, you got the lecture, then you would do the homework. But she was sort of pushing that, and she liked the fact that students would struggle, and then she would come in and reveal, okay, this is how you solve these problems that you were struggling with, right? So just from a you know, Mallory, to your point of active learning, that's an example, I think, of that kind of learning, right? So you're going to learn by essentially figuring it out yourself. And I think that works for some students. I can imagine it doesn't work for everybody. And so it's actually interesting because I want to see how, I mean, I imagine many students would be really frustrated because they can't figure these things out. But I don't think they're penalized for trying in the homework. So anyway, just an aside there to your point. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Stefano, we were just in the middle of a conversation, so I want to let him finish. But Stefano, do you feel comfortable sharing something that you learned with everybody?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my like learning diagram was fairly balanced, and save for the visual verbal part, and I got a score of 11 for visual, which means that, you know, I learned better by trying to visualize, looking at diagrams, looking at graphs. So I mean, this helped me to see that perhaps when I'm teaching, I am preferring this method of teaching my students, thinking that they are also visual learners. But this exercise helped to also reflect upon my own teaching strategies and try to also include a bit more on the verbal side of things. And so the ways that I could go about doing this, for example, is assigning students to groups and having those groups work through a sample problem, or assigning students to groups of 2 or 3, and then having one of the students present a concept that we've just learned to their partners and vice versa. And lastly, you know, as we've just done, breakout rooms through Zoom also help to enhance verbal learning.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Yeah, how about, let me ask, because I know many of you are verbal learners, or learn that you've learned best by looking at words. We talked about that a little bit last time. Who has a strategy what would help let's say Stefano is teaching a class and he's very visual, so he uses a lot of diagrams and visuals, but what would you, as a receiving end, if you're a student in that class, would like to see if you wanted to get things also in verbal form? Like, what would be helpful for you? Anyone? I mean, what I'm thinking is the following, just came to my mind, which is that a lot of times you might, one thing I found is interesting about the internet is I can easily search for the concept I'm trying to talk about, right? And on the internet, you can click on images, whether you want to see images versions of that concept, or you could just go on the regular search and it'll, you know, Wikipedia or something will have a textual description. And it would be interesting to maybe you just take that textual description and drop it in next to your figure, right? So now someone has a choice of they can read about it or they can see it, or both. And that might be a way of accounting for those two different learning styles.
So
right?
I'm a visual learner, but in my undergrad, they basically would have two things, a presentation and lecture notes. So the lecture notes are kind of a mini textbook that the teacher would print out before each lecture and just kind of hand out at the beginning of the class. And you could just kind of annotate the lecture notes, which are all in prose, so kind of all in writing, but then would have his own slides as he was kind of annotating that. So if you're verbal, you could pay attention to the lecture notes, and if you're visual, you could look at the slides.
Okay, okay. But let me ask this, how about synchronizing the two up? In other words, if there's an image that you also wanted to connect to the words, how was that difficult, or would you sketch it out on top of the paper, or how would you do that?
Yeah, so the lecture notes would actually have blank spaces for you to kind of draw in your own diagrams if that's what you wanted to do.
Okay, okay, great, great. And that was good, you enjoyed it, you liked that process?
Yeah, I really liked it. I'm visual, but you know, being forced to kind of draw the diagrams out that were on the slides would actually help quite a bit with my own learning.
Good. Okay. Well, it's also interesting that we were just actually talking about this earlier today. That I think, you know, here's another thing that's interesting is the idea of captioning. You know, that some students might actually like or benefit. Certainly, anyone who's hearing impaired, but for all students, let me just ask you guys, and we've been struggling with this because I'm trying to figure out how to get captioning to work in Zoom. Right, it works very nicely in Google Meet as auto captioning in real time, which is actually pretty good. But just, I'm curious about this. If you had captioning and it were going on live underneath, would you find that helpful, distracting? What do you guys think about that? Because I think
I would definitely
ahead.
find captioning. I would definitely find captioning extremely helpful. I've
Helpful.
attended some of the workshops that had captioning, and it really helps with with like just making sure that you don't really miss anything. I don't know. It's really different, especially when especially when there's a lot of people on the call. Sometimes somebody's volume's really low, somebody's volume's really high, and then the captioning really helps sort of not miss anything and have to like repeat anything.
Okay. No, it's very interesting. I mean, I'm just curious, was it using Google captioning system?
I'm honestly not sure how they did the captioning. This was in one of the teaching workshops.
Okay.
I'm not sure how they built it and how they got it to work into their Zoom call.
Yeah, I think they have professional captioners. So it's a person typing, and this is a very interesting because one thing is that there's a lot of variability in the skill level of the captioners, and I've been in meetings where the captioners are really way off and fairly slow. So it's actually distracting because you're watching and you can see them struggling and they're getting a lot of the words wrong, and then that could be a negative. I think if you have someone who's good, or sometimes I'm actually hoping that Google is getting better and better at voice recognition. And it's in Google Meet, I find it surprising, but it does help clarify. And especially, I think for non-native speakers, it can be very helpful just to have the caption there. So some people are saying, so here is very interesting. Some say it's also distracting. So the idea is that you could turn it on or off, right? So that's, again, for learning styles, that would be great. So you could say, I want to see that, or I don't, and then just turn it off. I think it's also kind of interesting to have the caption after the fact as a transcript, because it helps you search for something in a lecture. Because if you want to remember, what was that thing we talked about captioning, you could just search for it and find it. So, okay.
I was going to add in, I think I was at the same session as Salim, and yeah, they did a really good job, but there was maybe like 3 or 4 words where it seemed like it wasn't someone typing. It was like something picked up by like automatic translate, where like the word was severely off, and that distracted me. But the rest of the time, it seemed, for most of the time, it was good.
Yeah. I've seen some where there's foreign words that totally get botched. It tries to make it an English approximation, and it's like completely laughable. And it's like, no, yeah. But maybe that gives a little comic relief, which can't hurt in a class. Okay, good. So what I'm hearing from you is that you're starting to recognize that there's all this variation out there in learning styles, and that you're identifying what your strengths are, and also how it's different than others. And so it's a reminder to step back and think about how to accommodate as many different forms as you can, and not always teach to essentially your ideal self, right? That's a very, very common error, and I've made it myself. But I want to teach the way I want to learn, but that's actually not. That's going to miss out on a good fraction of your students. So be open, try experiments, and talk with them. I think that you're going to irritate. Anything you do is going to irritate certain people, and that's just. But it's worth it if it helps a good portion of your class as well. So the ideal is when these things can be optional, like the captions, and you could turn it on or off, and someone who could use it if they want to or not. So good. All right. So anybody else want to share anything that they learned before we move on? Okay. Great.
I had a question, Professor.
Yes.
This was a random idea I just got. So you mentioned
Okay.
like we should, like teach to your students' learning styles and I think I had a lot of similar reflections as Stefano. Would you recommend us giving this quiz to our students so that they can discover what their preferred learning styles are? Because I mean, I don't know. I feel like as an undergrad, I didn't even know really.
Mm-hmm.
So that, then you could have this communication with your students. I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
I love that question, Sensei, and I would actually, I would definitely like to. In fact, toward the end of the class last time, we talked about a fun extension of this would be a version of that quiz that you could send out like a Google form, and what it would do is it would give you the aggregates and the standard deviations for the whole class. So everybody would get their own individual, but then the instructor, you as the instructor would see what is the overall, how is the class mapping out. And I'd be very curious about that, because it for example, does it skew in certain directions, or is it pretty much all over the place, or what? And that would be very helpful for me to know. So right now it doesn't exist, but I said it would be a great little project. Someone who wants to do a little JavaScript hacking could probably put that together in a weekend. And if you guys don't pick up on it, I'm going to see if one of my students wants to do it for next year. But I do think it would be a nice little tool, and you can absolutely assign it. It's a free system, and you can just send that out. I find it a very nice tool to get insight. So please feel free to share it with your students and ask them to do it, and you can have the same conversation. Good. Okay. All right, good. So now what I want to do is, and we could keep talking about this, and we will intersect on this again through the course of the semester. But what I wanted to know is ask about peer teaching and peer observation. So please raise your hand in the participant section if you are teaching this term. So good. So I see Emma's put your hand up in there's little blue hands that you can raise and lower over here. So far I'm only seeing 3, but I'm guessing more of you are teaching, basically being GSI in a class this semester. I thought it was more closer to 10 or 12 of you. It's really only 3? Okay, wait, now we got 4, 5, 6, okay. Only 5. All right. So here's what I want to ask is, would you be comfortable sharing your, would you be comfortable being observed? And why that, what I wanted to do is have peer teaching observations. And that is where you could, by notify your class, but just say, I have some students are going to come in and observe the teaching in your session, and they won't participate. They'll just sort of hang out in the background, which actually makes it very easy to do this on Zoom. But who would be interested in doing that? Would all of you be willing to do that? I see 4. Okay, someone isn't, but 4 of you are. Emma, Julie, Yoon, and Eduardo. All right, I applaud your braveness. All right, so here's what I'd like to do is I'd like to propose that we're gonna do this, and we're gonna, oh, someone dropped out. Shoot. Everybody's dropping out. Don't worry, it's not so scary. All right, well, maybe we can't do it then. What I wanted to do was to encourage you to go in and have people observe your class, your performance. And I wanted this because I think it can be very, very helpful. Now, if you don't go into one of the peer students, you could go into any class that, Claire said will be nice. But here's the thing, you can do this for any class, that even a class you're taking. Okay, so you can just go in and be an observer, essentially, of a class that you're taking. And what I want you to go into this idea of what an observation session looks like. And so there's I put in here in the syllabus that it's called the Georgia Tech Classroom Teaching Observation Checklist. And I'm gonna put that up and share my screen here and show it to you. We'll talk about it. Can you guys see my screen here? Can you see it? The Georgia Tech thing?
Yes.
Okay, good. So what this is, it's actually a 4-page document, actually 5-page document, and it's very, very interesting to do this process. And I want you all to do it from the observer point of view. So what that means is you're gonna observe an instructor from a perspective of this class, right? Which is thinking about what are they good at, how do they perform, all right? And you're going to do this checklist as you do it. And look at the instructions that you're going to read the form first. Then you're going to use this, go through these checkpoints, and then you're going to give a quick summary on the final page. And there's a debrief conversation with the instructor. We're not going to do that in this class because if you're observing someone, you know, in one of your own classes, then you're not going to necessarily debrief with them. But what I want you to do is to basically write this down. If you want it to be anonymous, that's fine too. In fact, it may be easier for you not to tell us exactly who the instructor is or the course title. But I want you to go through and go through this process for one class that you choose and one session. So you're going to be looking at the organization. The instructor arrives on time, relates this. You see the points here? Now, the reason this is very interesting is that this is actually very typical for a student, instructor evaluation that you might get in a job, in a teaching job. Okay, you will be evaluated, and it's good to know what that's like, what evaluators are looking for, and it's very informative just to think about how that happens. So so you can see what I'm saying, which is by reading between the lines of each of these things, it's sort of also helping you to think about how you teach, and hopefully, you know, these are things you might not think about, and it will remind you about that those are possibly important and will be something that someone could be evaluating you on. Okay. Then there's the presentation skills, and this is what we've been talking about earlier in this course, in the chalkboard lectures. Things about being audible, articulating words, represents words that might be difficult for students to hear, varies the tone and pitch of voice for emphasis and interest. We talked about that a little bit. Speaks at a pace that students can understand, establishes and maintains eye contact, very important, especially on Zoom. Avoids over-reliance on reading content, so you're not just reading your notes. Avoids distracting mannerisms, and uses visual aids effectively, uses the classroom space, which is very interesting now with Zoom. But what does it mean to use the space? Okay, so that's the second one. The third is the rapport. Attends respectively to student comprehension, invites students' participation and comments, inviting questions, treats students as individuals, uses students' names. That's really interesting. Actually, I'd love to talk about that one because I think that's very interesting in its own right. We'll come back to it. Periodic feedback, student ideas in the class, uses positive reinforcement rather than negative reinforcement like punishing students. Okay, don't do that. And the next one is about clarity of the instructor. Uses examples, repeats complex information, pauses to ask for questions. Okay, pacing of the instruction. This is about variation.
Riley, sneaky.
Oh, somebody has their mic on. Just keep an eye on that. All right, and then sufficient time. If they go too slow, too fast, etc. Again, it's hard to get this out of one class if you're observing it, but if you're doing this on a class that you've been taking, it'll be easier to do because you'll have more to draw from. And then content knowledge. Again, we can refer to that too. And the final page is a summary. what went well, how could you improve it, additional comments. So that's the compliment sandwich that I talked about earlier, which is if you're going to give this to the instructor, you'd want to be able to say some positives, then some possible room areas for improvement, and then close with some more positives. Okay, so this is linked into the syllabus. You can get your own copy of this, and I want you to take it with you and download a copy. And then I think what we're going to do, since we only have 2 volunteers, is that rather than do it among each other, unless someone really wants to be observed. Emma, you really want to be observed?
Oh, no, I just forgot to lower my hand, but
Oh, okay.
I'm good either way. But it might be weird if 32 people come to my section.
Yeah, that could. I agree. That would be a little bit odd. So I appreciate your braveness, though. But if someone is interested in going to Emma's class, then please get in touch with me. And if anybody would really like to do it, I think what in the last year we actually had about 9 or 10 people who were teaching, and they all so we split up and went to their classes to do the process. But I think it's just as easy to have you go and do this for a class that you're taking this semester, but fill out this as an exercise, because I want you to know what the kind of criteria are for teachers, instructors, and GSIs. And this will help you get a little bit of a sense of sort of stepping out of your role as doing the job into thinking, okay, how is this being viewed? How is this being evaluated? Not only by students, but in this case by, let's say, administrators or maybe senior faculty or others who are trying to evaluate you. Okay, so is that helpful to get the idea? So this is the homework for this week, which is I'm going to take this out. The sign up for peer teaching observation session. Don't worry about that. So I'm saying ignore this and just download the teaching observation checklist, and then so it won't be peer, it'll just be instructor observation. So, and you don't have to do any arranging, just observe your instructor.
What's the purpose or benefit of watching like a peer versus an instructor?
Well, the peer is really nice because then you're really looking at another person at your level, like another GSI. And then it was much more, last year when we did this, it was much more of an exchange because more people were teaching, serving as GSIs. So they were exchanging a bunch of ideas among each other. So that was the benefit. But I think especially because we're on Zoom this year, it's a little trickier. And plus it was tricky last year too, because you had to worry about the schedules and getting into the room and all this stuff. So I think you can just wrap this in easily into a class you're already taking and just sort of step back and think about answering these questions from a meta level. Okay?
Hey, Professor?
Yeah.
How often does this get used for Berkeley? Like how often would someone come in and watch a professor?
Great question. It should happen once or twice a semester if you're a GSI. The instructor should observe you. In the 375, in other 375 classes, it's actually, if you're taking that it's often part of that process that you get observed somewhere along the line. This class is actually on the big side, so if you have a very small 375 class, I would come in and observe you if you wanted. But it's not possible in a class that's with 30 plus students. But if you're a faculty member, yes, you're going to get observed probably once or twice a year, and certainly around the time you're coming up for promotion, like a tenure. Then there's a pretty extensive analysis of your teaching, and it's very helpful to have a personal observation of the teacher. so you can write about it. Does that answer your question? It
Yeah.
varies a lot. I mean, you may very well have an instructor who never comes to your session and you never get observed. That can happen too. So it's not a requirement, but it's very helpful. And if your instructor has the time and the initiative, it's very helpful to be able to listen in. When I've done this a few times too with my students, Chris is GSI in one of my classes now, and I've had the opportunity to sit in on the labs where he's teaching, and it's really helpful for me to hear how he was doing it, how he handles questions, all of that. And it's nice to be, a fly on the wall and then be able to help if needed, but also to be able to give him some feedback. And by the way, you can ask for this. That's another thing I should mention. If you want it, you can ask your instructor, say, would you observe me and give me some feedback? I don't know if they'll have time to do it, but you could certainly, it doesn't hurt to ask. And I think it would be really interesting. Shows a lot of initiative. And like Emma there, a lot of guts to be able to say, come and watch me, okay? But it would be actually, if my GSI said that to me, I would be really impressed and I would absolutely do it. Okay? All right, so I want you to get that experience because I just want you to be in a position of seeing it from the other side. Mostly because you'll learn, what those criteria are and how you might anticipate them. All right. Okay. Any other questions about it?
Yeah,
yes.
You had a point you wanted to make that you said you'd come back to later, with respect to the checklist.
Oh yes.
And we never came back to it.
Checklist. It was about learning students' names, actually. Thank you, Preston. So, how many of you let's put it this way, how many of you have a challenge with learning people's names? Let's go back to actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Come back to it. A couple people. Okay, I see Claire, Anthony, Julie. I have to confess, I'm going to confess to you guys, I have an enormous problem with this. It's like a cognitive defect. Like I can't remember names. I actually get kind of panicky when I see somebody that I know really well and I blank on their name. And it's really bad around Thanksgiving because it happens around like people in my own family. Or like weddings or something like that. I'll come up and I'll say, this is my cousin I've known all my life, but I totally blank on his name. It's just a shortfall on my part. I've tried all the tricks. By the way, everyone says, "Oh, you can learn how to fix it." I can't, and it's a problem. So it's a particular problem is in teaching because it's very hard to learn my friends' names, let alone students that I'm just, especially in a class that's over 5 or 10 students. It's very overwhelming. So and here's what I've wrestled with over the years is that I am afraid that if I learn a few students' names, like the student sitting in the front row who always has their hand up, then other students are gonna feel kind of that it's unfair that I haven't learned their names. So I feel like maybe to be fair, I shouldn't really use anybody's name. Okay, but I always find that to be very suboptimal. And ultimately, I know it's frustrating from a student's perspective. We know from this well-known lore among professors that if you can learn all your students' names, you'll get much better student ratings. Okay, it's just well, at least it's a legend. I'm pretty sure it's true. But some people are just like amazing. They can remember they see somebody, they remember their name forever, and it's effortless. If you're like that, it's great. Because you really make use of that, and I've seen it's very impressive. I'm astounded when I see people who can do that. But if you can't, and if you're like some of the people who have their hands up, I'm just curious what your thoughts are. And let me just say the punchline here is that Zoom is fantastic for this reason. Okay. I can learn your names. I have a prompt right here, right? Which is what I always wished for. Like one year I had every student make up a placard with their name and they would hold it up when they had a question. And that worked for like a week. And then everybody forgot the placards. And I was like, and sometimes the placard would be at the back of the room and I couldn't see it, and it was like, that didn't work. So any thoughts on this? How about you guys? Do you, anybody have any thoughts, positive, negative? Does it matter? Are you doing it? Maybe we should hear from one person who's good at memorizing names, another person who's bad.
I feel like for me, I don't know, with Zoom, it's definitely like cheating. You kind of see the names everywhere, so that doesn't really count. But in other courses, I feel like when there's like a bonding exercise in the beginning of the course, where everybody like introduces their name and like fun facts or something like that, or something about them, or you do like you do some game where people put names. I feel like that typically helps the most. Or when people like in classes need to introduce their name and then ask a question, then it's like, oh, this is the person who asked that question, or this is the person who did that. Like associating the person's name to like something that happened in the class at some point is what helps me remember names the best.
Okay, good. Does that scale?
I feel like
does that scale to a large? How big of a class does that work for?
That's true. I mean, in bigger classes, I feel like it ends up being like knowing the names of the people who are in your like discussion section, or in your like, I guess maybe the Zoom equivalent of like a breakout room or something like that. And then the rest of the class, you never really, you like know the faces, but yeah, then you never really know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's on the checklist, and that's why it triggered me to think of it. It's that does the instructor address the students by name? And I'm sure I get a 0 on that every time. But you know, it's something to keep in mind. And if you can do it, and you're one of those lucky people who has that skill, then it's definitely a great thing to apply.
I also feel like I always assume. Oh, sorry. I always feel like I always assume that the instructor is not going to remember a name, and reminding with the name or with like a follow-up email after class is always necessary.
That's interesting. Well, I think I'm actually curious about this. Maybe let's ask it from the other side, from a student perspective. Do people feel strongly? Do you care if your instructor uses your name? How do you guys feel about that? Anybody?
I think I don't mind when the professor can remember other people's names, but not mine. I think that's okay. But I think I would appreciate it if the professor asks me, even if like multiple times, like every time I answer a question, you ask me my name and you never remember, but that's fine. At least you always ask. I think that's okay. Yeah. It gives me confidence that one day you're trying and you're gonna learn. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, if they keep asking over and over and over, you're still okay with that?
I think it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I'll tell you one of the things that I find just personal, interesting, that sometimes I'll be at a party and someone will say, you know, I'll say, oh, nice to meet you. And they'll say, you know, we met twice before. And my feeling is like, okay, you know, what do I say? I feel really bad about that. But it's sort of like, I don't know. I feel like you just it's like I had a hearing disability and you're shouting at me or something. I mean, like I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, and it's not my, you know, it's not that I'm, you know, I think people assume I'm being rude, or being just arrogant and unthoughtful, but it's just I can't remember. And then by saying it that way, I'm like really mortified, and you know. And I've been on the other side of that. I'll see someone and they don't know who I am, but I always just roll with it. You know, I'm not going to drive it home and remind them that we've met 5 times already and you still don't remember my name, you jerk. You know. So anyway, this whole issue of names, I find it really subtle and probably because I have a problem with it. But yeah, assume everyone means well. That's right. So if you're on the receiving end, I think you know, just understand it's very hard for an instructor to remember everyone's name. And
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say one thing. I agree with what Emma said, but I think for me, like, you can keep asking me, just don't get my name wrong. So that is a big thing for me. Like, my legal name, so Sasha, which you see here is like a nickname. My legal name is Alexandra, and that shows up on like every single, it's my government name essentially. And so if they read off a roster, they read that. So if they refer to me as Alexandra, I know that they like don't care enough to get me, or I get Sarah all the time as well. So like, as long as you get my name, like, you keep asking me, just don't get it wrong. I feel like when someone gets it wrong, that's when it's a no-no for me.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you, Sasha. That's actually helpful. So, I mean, that's actually what I worry about, right? Is that if I tried and I got it partially right, that would actually aggravate. It's worse than not remembering. You know, just saying, you know. But the nice thing in this world with Zoom is that we have this right here. You know, so I'm actually curious about it, how it plays out for you in your classes, because I'm guessing that it's very normal that you have all this communication with your instructors. They all now have a good sense of your name, right? So right there. I actually consider it one of the big advantages of Zoom over real life classroom. Okay, good. Well, keep it in mind, names are complicated. And, you know, again, I think it's also, I always try for fairness. I wouldn't want to just remember certain names that are, you know, very familiar to me, and then names that may be foreign or I'm not as familiar with, then that would be, I would consider that, you know, very biased in the classroom. So that's why I think you have to be sensitive to it and try to be fair to everyone. So if you're learning some names and not others, I don't know. I find that to be problematic. Okay.
Professor, sorry. I have a question. On B courses, does like Cal still allow the roster photos option that instructors can see?
Enzi, you're so good. You went to exactly the next topic. We're going to talk about B courses right now, and I'm going to show you.
You can go ahead. Yeah.
No, it's perfect. It's a perfect segue, and the answer is yes. And let's do that. I'm going to share my screen with you. Perfect time. That's exactly, it's on the syllabus, is to talk about B courses right now. So I wanted to give you guys a glimpse from what B courses looks like from the inside, if you haven't seen this already. So B courses is a learning system. It's actually also known as Canvas, and it's actually it's made available to many universities. In fact, it's also being used a lot right now in high school and even middle schools. So one of the competitors to it, as you may have heard, is Google Classroom. Is another called a learning framework. But B courses is Canvas, which is what we use at Berkeley. And I just wanted to show you what this looks like from, again, an instructor. Now,